Math 1332, Chapter 2, Set Theory, Section 2.2, Subsets and Set Operations, Video 1, Universal Sets. In the previous series of videos, we discussed sets and elements and the relationship between them. In this series of videos for Section 2.2, we're going to discuss the relationships not between an element and a set, but the relationship between one set compared to another set. And in order to do that, we need to lay some groundwork, some foundation. So let's start with a concept called the universal set. For a given situation, the universal set, symbolized by a capital U, but for reasons which will become clear before the end of this series of videos, when I write the U for the universe, I'm going to put two little horizontal lines across each of its top lines to distinguish it from another symbol that we'll be using soon. If I stay on the schedule, it'll be in video 9 for the video series for this section. But for a given situation, the universal set, symbolized by a capital U, it looks like a horseshoe, is the set of all objects that are reasonable to consider in that situation. A universal set changes from problem to problem. Sometimes you'll be told, here's what the universal set is, or more succinctly, the universe. But sometimes it's inferred based on a context. For example, let's say a school district is concerned about its employees' safety. What set of objects is the school district going to look at? In other words, what is the universal set in this situation? Well, it's all of their employees. And if we knew all of their names, we could open up a set and roster form and write the names of all those employees. But in the absence of that information, we can just describe, using the descriptive method, the universal set. The universal set in this context could be the set of district employees. Again, the universal set is often implied by a context. Next example, a physicist wants to study bridges. Okay, so what is the universal set of object this physicist is concerned with? How about the set of all bridges? Now, with more information, we could have a more well-defined universal set. For example, perhaps this physicist is just studying suspension bridges, in which case the universal set could be the set of all suspension bridges, or drawbridges, or bridges in a certain state, or bridges over rivers as opposed to over lakes. So the more information you have about a context, the more specific you can make your universal set. Let's take a look at this last example. A student is concerned with his grades. What is the collection of objects for this situation? Answer, the student's grades. So our universal set could be the set of the student's grades. Now, if we knew those students' grades, we could list them in roster form. For example, maybe the reason the student is concerned is because they first made 100, then they made a 90, then they made another 90, and in a previous video I said in a set, you shouldn't list an element more than once, but we could specifically say the assignment that this element came from, that this grade came from, and hence treat these as two different 90s. For example, we could say this is 90 on homework 1, this is a 90 on homework 2. But then suddenly, they got a 50, a 0 because they didn't do the assignment, and then another 50. Or whatever all the students' grades are. So in general, the universal set is just the largest set in consideration for a problem. It's the set of all objects that are reasonable to consider in that situation. For example, in this first example, it would not be reasonable for the universal set to contain people that are not in the school district's employ. In the second set, it would not be reasonable for the universal set to contain rockets. And in the third set, it would not be reasonable for this universal set to contain grades from another student, because it's about a certain student, not all students. So the concept of a universal set is pretty simple. It's all possible objects in consideration for a given situation.